The rain drummed against the windshield as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I had been parked outside the Blue Orchid Hotel for nearly an hour, watching, waiting. I had no proof, only a gnawing suspicion, a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. It all started with the late-night texts. Laura, my wife of 7 years, had been acting strange for the past few months. She was always on her phone, always smiling at messages she never shared. Then came the sudden change in schedule, late meetings, unexplained absences, and the scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering on her clothes. I hired a private investigator, a man named Calloway, who had seen it all. When he slid the envelope across the table to me at a dimly lit diner 3 nights ago, I hesitated before opening it. "You don't have to look if you don't want to," Calloway said, his voice rough from years of cigarette smoke. I opened it anyway. Photos. Laura, dressed in the red dress I had bought her for our anniversary, her hand resting on the arm of another. Man, a well-dressed man, tall, sharp jawline, the kind of confidence that came with old money. They weren't just meeting, they were kissing. And now, I was here, watching as she entered the hotel with him. I stepped out of my car and into the storm. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I walked through the lobby, my drenched clothes sticking to my skin. The receptionist barely looked up as I strode toward the elevator. The number Calloway had given me burned into my memory. Room 1423. I reached the door and knocked. Silence. Then, shuffling. A muffled voice. "Room service?" I called, disguising. My voice just enough. A second later, the door cracked open and I shoved it wide. Laura gasped, half-dressed, her hair tousled. The man beside her, the same man from the photos, froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Well," I said, stepping inside, dripping water onto the plush carpet. "This is awkward." Laura wrapped a sheet around herself, scrambling off the bed. "James, this isn't—" "Don't," I cut her off, my voice dangerously calm. I turned to the man. "And you must be the reason my wife suddenly found me so boring." He straightened, regaining his composure. "Look, Save it," I interrupted. "I didn't come here for excuses. I came here to make sure this ends permanently." The room was thick with tension, the storm outside raging as fiercely as the fury inside me. But little did Laura or her lover know, I hadn't come alone. Calloway was waiting outside, recording everything, and this wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposure. And I was going to make sure everyone knew. Would you like to continue? There's plenty more intrigue, confrontation, and revelation to come. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap. Laura clutched the sheet around her, her lips parted, searching for an excuse, an explanation, anything that could undo what was already done. But I wasn't here for apologies. The man, her lover, took a step forward, trying to mask his nerves with arrogance. "Look, man, I don't know what you think this is, but—" I laughed. A slow, humorless chuckle. "You don't know? Should I clarify it for you? Because I have photos, timestamps, even video footage." I gestured toward the slightly open door where I knew Calloway's camera lens was capturing every second. "And I made sure to send copies to a few trusted friends." Laura's face drained of color. "James, please—" "Save it," I cut in. "How long, Laura? How long have you been sneaking around with him?" She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. 6 months, the man answered instead, his voice steadier now. "And my name is Eric, by the way, since you didn't bother to ask." I turned to him, my jaw tightening. "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Eric. Eric Langford, CEO of Langford Holdings. Recently divorced, no kids, loves expensive whiskey, and apparently other men's wives." His smirk faltered. "How do you—" "I do my research," I said, stepping closer. "And you should have too, because if you had, you'd know I don't just walk away from betrayals." Laura reached out, but I stepped back, letting the sting of rejection cut as deep as her infidelity. "James, I never meant—" "You never meant for me to find out? Never meant to hurt me?" I scoffed. "Spare me the cliches, Laura." Eric cleared his throat. "All right, enough of this. You've made your little scene. What do you want? Money?" I turned to him, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I grinned, a slow, knowing grin. "Money? Oh no, Eric. I don't want your money. I want something much better." Eric frowned. "And what's that?" I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Exposure. Within seconds, a notification popped up on Eric's own phone. His eyes flickered down to it, and I saw the exact moment realization struck. The file, the photos, the recordings, sent to every major media outlet, every business rival he had, every socialite that made up his pristine, untouchable world. His face went pale. "You son of a, huh?" "Careful, Eric," I warned. "Wouldn't want to say something you regret." Laura's breath hitched. "James, you— Oh, and Laura—" I turned to her, my voice colder now. "You might want to check your phone, too." A buzz. Her hands shook as she picked it up. And then horror. Her family, our friends. Everyone knew. "This," she whispered, tears welling up. "This is cruel." "No, Laura," I said, stepping toward the door. "This is justice." And with that, I walked out, leaving them behind in the wreckage of their own making. Would you like to see what happens next? There's always another layer to the story. I stepped into the hallway, my pulse still pounding in my ears, but I felt lighter, freer. For months, I'd been drowning in suspicion and doubt, questioning whether I was losing my mind. Now, the truth was out. I walked past Calloway, who stood, leaning against the opposite wall, arms crossed. "That went well," he muttered, tucking his phone into his coat pocket. "You ready for the next phase?" I smirked. Oh, I was born ready. The elevator dinged, and I stepped inside, exhaling slowly as the doors slid shut. Calloway followed. "You're sure the media will run with it?" I asked, watching the floor numbers drop. "Oh, they'll eat it up. A billionaire businessman exposed. In a seedy affair scandal?" "The headlines write themselves," Calloway said. "And your wife? She's about to become a household name, for all the wrong reasons." I nodded, but my mind was already moving ahead, calculating the next steps. Exposure wasn't enough. Not yet. When we reached the lobby, Calloway handed me a manila folder. "Divorce lawyer, one of the best. He's expecting your call." I took it without hesitation. "And the financials?" "Checked everything. Your accounts are clean." "She didn't take anything yet, but I'd freeze any joint assets before she gets desperate." "Done," I said, pulling out my phone to make the call. As we stepped into the rain, my phone buzzed. A message from Laura. "James, please. Can we talk? Just us?" Not like this. Not in the middle of a storm. I stared at the screen, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Calloway peered over my shoulder. "Gonna respond?" I clenched my jaw, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, "No, Laura. The storm's already here, and it's not going away." I hit send. Then, without another thought, I blocked her number. This was just the beginning, to be continued. "Do you want to see what happens next? Maybe Laura isn't as defeated as she seems." The storm outside raged, but inside my mind, everything was crystal clear. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control. About making sure I dictated the final chapter of this story. Not Laura, not Eric, me. I sat in my car, outside my lawyer's office, gripping the manila folder Calloway had given me. I had already frozen our joint assets. By tomorrow morning, Laura would wake up to find herself locked out of our accounts, her access revoked. But just as I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed again. A new number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in my gut told me to answer. "James Carter speaking." A pause. Then a deep voice, one I didn't recognize. "You think this is over?" I sat up straighter. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled. Low, deliberate. "You made a mistake, Carter. You thought you were playing chess, but you're just another pawn in a much bigger game." I glanced around the parking lot, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. "You sound like someone with a lot to say, so say it." "You shouldn't have embarrassed Eric Langford," the voice continued. "You should have walked away. Now, you've started something you can't finish." The line went dead. My fingers tightened around the phone. Langford. I knew he'd be furious. But a threat? That was a whole new level. I took a breath, forcing myself to think. Langford wasn't just some rich playboy. His family had deep ties to politics, business, and, if the rumors were true, some less than legal dealings. Had I underestimated him? I dialed Calloway. He picked up on the second ring. "Talk to me," he said. I kept my voice steady. "Someone just called me, threatened me. Said I should have left Langford alone," Calloway cursed under his breath. "Shit. You think he's making a move?" I exhaled. "I don't know, but I need you to dig deeper. Find out if Langford has any real dirt on him. Something we can use as insurance." A pause. Then, "Consider it done. But be careful, Carter. You just poked a sleeping bear. And bears, they bite." I hung up. The game had changed. This wasn't just about Laura anymore. This was about survival. And I never lost. Should we take this deeper? A high-stakes game with secrets, power, and revenge? The storm outside had settled, but inside a war was brewing. I sat in my dimly lit apartment, my hands steepled as I stared at the laptop screen. Calloway had sent me a file, thick with information on Eric Langford. The deeper I dug, the more I realized I hadn't just pissed off a rich businessman. I had kicked a hornet's nest. Langford wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful, ruthless. His divorce last year? Not as clean as the tabloids made it seem. His ex-wife Victoria had vanished off the grid. No social media, no public appearances, just gone. And now, after a single night, I was getting threats? Yeah, this wasn't over. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. My instincts flared. It was nearly midnight. No one should be here. I reached for the Glock I kept in the desk drawer, flicked off the safety, and approached the door. "Who is it?" Silence. I checked the peephole. Laura. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed. She looked like she had been crying for hours. I wasn't in the mood for her games. "Go home, Laura." She hesitated. "James, please. You don't understand." I clenched my jaw. "Understand what? That you cheated? Lied? That I caught you and ruined your lover's reputation? Yeah, I think I understand just fine." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They're going to kill you." I froze. Laura glanced over, her shoulder like someone might be watching. "James, you don't know who you're dealing with. Eric, he's not just some CEO. He has people, dangerous people." She swallowed. "I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. And now that you exposed him, he's coming for you." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Why should I believe you?" I asked, my voice cold. Her eyes darted to the gun in my hand. "Because I know you, James. You think you've won, but you haven't. You're in danger." I exhaled sharply, my mind racing. If Langford had people watching, it meant I had a small window to act. "I need details," I said finally. "Everything, you know?" Laura hesitated, then nodded. "Let me in." I opened the door. She stepped inside, but as I locked the door behind her, a feeling crawled up my spine. Had I just let in a warning? Or a trap? Want to continue? Should we uncover the full extent of Langford's secrets? The moment Laura stepped inside, I could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing between us. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sleeves of her coat, her eyes darting toward the darkened windows. She was scared, truly scared. but I wasn't sure if it was for me or because of me. "Talk," I said, keeping my voice even. "You wanted to warn me? Now's your chance." She turned toward me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? Or was it just another layer of her deception? "Eric has people," she started. "Real power. Not just money. Connections. Political. Criminal. You weren't supposed to find out about us, James. But now that you did, he sees you as a threat. And Eric doesn't do threats." I narrowed my eyes. "And how exactly do you know all this?" She hesitated. "Laura," I pressed. "Tell me the truth." She exhaled shakily, dropping onto the couch. "Because I heard him talking to someone on the phone right after you left the hotel. He was furious, pacing the room, cursing your name. Then he said something that chilled me to the bone." I waited. She swallowed hard. "Make sure Carter doesn't wake up tomorrow." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt my heartbeat slow, not from fear, but from something colder. "More calculated. Who was he talking to?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But whoever it was, they had power. Real power. Eric was nervous. I've never seen him like that before." I studied her carefully. She could be lying, playing the part of the concerned wife, trying to get me to drop my guard. But something about the way her hands clenched, the slight tremble in her voice, it felt real. Calloway had warned me. I had kicked a hornet's nest, and now I had a choice. Either run, or burn the whole damn thing down. I took a slow breath. "Laura, if I let you stay, if I trust you for even a second, you need to tell me something else." She nodded quickly. "Eric. What's his weakness?" Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, finally, she whispered, "His brother." I frowned. "I didn't know he had one." "Nobody does," she said, "because he's locked away in a private asylum. Eric's kept it a secret for years. He's terrified that if it gets out, it'll ruin him. His entire public image is built on power and control. If people knew his own bloodline was unstable..." She let the implication hang. I leaned back, considering. "Where is this brother?" Laura's voice was barely above a whisper. "I can take you to him." I stared at her, feeling the weight of the next step forming in my mind. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This wasn't just about exposing a cheating wife. This was war, and I was about to hit Eric Langford where it hurt. A long silence stretched between us. Laura's words echoed in my mind. His brother. A secret so well guarded that even Calloway's deep dive into Eric Langford hadn't uncovered it. "If this is a trap, Laura," I said quietly, my fingers tightening, around the Glock still resting on my lap. "You won't live to see it play out." She flinched but didn't back down. "It's not a trap," she said, voice steady. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I also know Eric. He doesn't lose, and he never forgives. If you don't hit him first, he will bury you, James." I studied her. The woman I once loved, the woman I thought I knew. Was she really betraying Eric to save me? Or was this just another layer of her deception? Either way, I needed leverage. "Where is he?" I asked. Laura swallowed hard. "Eric's brother, David, is locked away in a private psychiatric facility, a place called Holloway Institute. It's off the books, funded through Langford Holdings shell companies, no paper trail, no public record. Eric made sure no one even knows David exists." I nodded, mind already spinning. If this was true, this was it. The kind of bombshell that could ruin Eric Langford beyond repair. "How do we get in?" I asked. Laura hesitated. I don't know, but I do know someone who does." Of course she did. I exhaled sharply. "Who?" She glanced at me warily. "Her name is Victoria Langford." I blinked. "His ex-wife?" Laura nodded. "She knew about David. In fact, I think that's why Eric made her disappear. But she's not dead, James. She's hiding. And I know where to find her. Damn Victoria Langford, the woman who walked away from a billion-dollar empire and vanished. If she had answers, then this game was bigger than I thought. Where is she? I asked. Laura hesitated again, then sighed. She's in Chicago, hiding under a new identity. I can get us to her, but James... Her voice softened. If we do this, there's no turning back. I smiled grimly. Laura, I crossed that line the moment I walked into that hotel room. I grabbed my coat, checked my gun, and reached for my car keys. Let's go find Victoria Langford. To be continued. Want to see what happens? When James finds Eric's ex-wife, secrets are about to be uncovered. The drive to Chicago was silent, but the tension sat between us like a loaded gun. Rain drizzled against the windshield, casting long, jagged reflections on the empty highway. Laura sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out the window, like she was somewhere else entirely. I couldn't blame her. She had betrayed me, lied to me. But now she was my key to unlocking Eric Langford's darkest secrets. You've been quiet, I said finally. She didn't look at me. I'm just thinking. About what? A bitter chuckle. About how insane this is. She finally turned, her eyes searching mine. James, what are we really doing here? You exposed the affair. You already humiliated Eric. Can't you just walk away? I tightened my grip on the wheel. He isn't walking away, Laura. You said it yourself. Eric doesn't lose. And right now, he thinks I'm a problem that needs to be eliminated. Her shoulders slumped. I never wanted it to go this far, I scoffed. You think I did? You think I wanted to find out my wife was sneaking around with a man who now wants me dead? I shook my head. No, Laura. You made your choices. And now we deal with the consequences. She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Probably because she knew I was right. We pulled into Chicago just after 2 a.m. I followed Laura's directions to a quiet, upscale neighborhood on the north side of the city. It was the kind of place where people had security systems and private guards, where the rich hid from the rest of the world. This is it, Laura whispered as I parked outside a small, ivy-covered townhouse. Victoria's been living here under the name Rebecca Vaughn. I killed the engine and turned to her. And she's just going to talk to us? Laura bit her lip. I don't know. But if she still hates Eric as much as I think she does, she might. Exhaled sharply. Let's find out. We stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my skin. The house was dark except for a single light glowing in the upstairs window. I knocked firmly, my other hand resting near the gun tucked into my waistband. Nothing. Knocked again. Then I heard it, the soft shuffle of movement behind the door. A pause. Then a quiet, cautious voice. Who is it? Laura stepped forward. Victoria. It's me. Laura. Silence. Then the locks clicked open. The door swung inward, revealing a woman with dark auburn hair, sharp cheekbones, and wary eyes. She was dressed casually, but there was nothing casual about the way she gripped the handle of the revolver in her hand. Laura, Victoria said coolly. Haven't seen you in a while. What the hell are you doing here? Laura swallowed hard. We need to talk. Victoria's eyes flicked to me, her grip on the gun tightening. And who's this? I met her gaze. James Carter, the man who just declared war on your ex-husband. Her lips curled into something that almost resembled a smirk. Well, she murmured, this should be interesting. She stepped aside, letting us in. As the door shut behind us, I had the sinking feeling that we had just crossed a threshold we could never return from. To be continued. Want to see what Victoria knows? This is only getting deeper. Whispers in the dark. Part 9, Victoria. Langford's townhouse was neat, but lived in. The kind of place that didn't belong to a woman who once graced the covers of high society magazines. It belonged to someone in hiding. She led us into a dimly lit sitting room, lowering herself into an armchair, her revolver still in her lap. She studied me carefully, then turned her sharp gaze to Laura. "You look like hell," she muttered. Laura huffed. "I've had a bad week," Victoria smirked. "That's what happens when you play with the devil, sweetheart." I leaned forward, my patience thinning. "We didn't come here for pleasantries, Victoria. We need information. About Eric. About his brother." Victoria's smirk vanished. She leaned, back in her chair, tapping her fingers against the revolver. "So, you finally found out about David?" she murmured. I nodded. "And I need to know everything." Victoria studied me for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, she stood and walked to a cabinet in the corner. She opened a drawer, pulled out a thick file, and tossed it onto the coffee table. "Eric doesn't just have a brother," she said. "He destroyed him." I opened the file, photos, reports, newspaper clippings. The deeper I dug, the more the truth unraveled before me. David Langford had once been a promising young man, brilliant even. But at some point, something changed. There were hospital records, psychiatric evaluations, reports of violent outbursts, erratic behavior, and then, suddenly, he was gone. No arrest records, no obituaries, no further hospitalizations. "Where is he now?" I asked. Victoria folded her arms. "Locked away in a place no one can find. Holloway Institute isn't just a hospital. It's a prison. Eric made sure David disappeared so he wouldn't taint the Langford name. No one even knows he exists anymore." Laura paled. "But why? What did David do?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "He killed someone." Silence. I exchanged a glance with Laura. "Who?" I asked carefully. Victoria hesitated. Then, softly, she said, "Our father?" The words hit like a gunshot. Laura inhaled sharply. "Eric's father? The one who supposedly died of a heart attack?" Victoria nodded. "That's the story Eric fed to the press. The truth is," David snapped, "one night there was an argument, and the next morning, our father was dead. Eric covered it up, paid off the right people, and buried the truth. He shipped David off to Holloway, erased every trace of him, and has been keeping him there ever since." I exhaled slowly. This was it. The thing that could break Eric Langford, not just a secret brother, a murderous brother, a crime covered up for decades. But I needed more. "How do we get to him?" I asked. Victoria hesitated. "You don't." I stared at her. "That's not an option," she sighed. "Holloway is impenetrable. Private security, no digital. Records, no legal paper trail. The only way in is through Eric himself, and I doubt he's just going to invite you in for a tour." I leaned back, considering. Then an idea struck. "If I can't go in as myself," I said slowly, "then I'll go in as someone else." Victoria frowned. "What are you talking about?" I smirked. "Every fortress has a weakness, and I'm going to find it." Laura shifted uncomfortably. "James, this is insane." I turned to her. "So is letting Eric get away with everything." Victoria watched me, something flickering in her eyes. Then, after a moment, she chuckled. "You're serious," she murmured. "Dead serious." Victoria studied me for a long moment. Then finally, she nodded. "All right, Carter, let's burn Eric Langford to the ground." To be continued? Ready for the infiltration? This is about to get dangerous. Victoria's smirk faded as she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "You don't just walk into Holloway, Carter. It's a fortress for a reason." I sat back, unfazed. "There's always a way in." Victoria exchanged a glance with Laura, then sighed. "You remind me of Eric," she muttered. I stiffened. Careful with that comparison. A wry smirk. I only mean that once you set your mind to something, you don't stop. It's what makes men like you dangerous. She took a slow sip of the whiskey she'd poured herself. But fine. If you want to play with fire, I'll tell you where to strike the match. I leaned in. I'm listening. Victoria set her glass down and pulled a folded document from the file. Holloway operates under total secrecy, but they still need one thing: doctors. She tapped a name on the page. Dr. Henry Mallory, chief psychiatrist. He's been working with Holloway for years, overseeing special patients. That includes David. I took the paper, scanning it quickly. And how does this help me? Victoria's lips curled into a slow smile. Because every 6 months, Dr. Mallory submits a full psychiatric review on David to an independent medical board. They keep it sealed, but it's a requirement for keeping Holloway's funding in the dark. Laura frowned. And? Victoria's eyes gleamed. The next review is due this week. Dr. Mallory will have to leave Holloway to deliver it personally. Which means he's vulnerable, I finished. Now we were talking. I exhaled, the gears already turning in my head. I didn't need to break into Holloway. I just needed to become the man who could. How tight is his security? I asked. Victoria shrugged. Low profile. He doesn't need much. Nobody knows who he is outside of Holloway. Then I'll be paying him a visit. I stood, tucking the paper into my pocket. If I can take his identity, I can walk right through Holloway's front doors. Laura paled. James, that's insane, I smirked. Yeah, but it's the only way. Victoria watched me with something close to admiration. You really aren't afraid of him, are you? I turned to face her. I don't fear men like Eric Langford. I slipped on my coat, adjusting the gun holstered beneath it. I hunt them. 1 week later, Dr. Henry Mallory never saw me coming. It was a quiet night. The old psychiatrist had just left a private dinner in downtown Chicago, taking a shortcut through the parking garage. Bad decision. As he unlocked his car, I stepped out of the shadows. He barely had time to register my presence before I pressed my gun against his ribs. Don't scream, I murmured, or I put a hole in you. Mallory stiffened, his breath coming in short gasps. Who are you? What do you want? I smirked. Your face, your name, and your access to Holloway. His eyes widened. I can't. I slammed him against the car, hard enough to rattle his bones. You will. You're going to take a nice long nap, and when you wake up, you'll be somewhere safe. I pressed the barrel against his temple. But if you don't cooperate, then you'll wake up dead. Tears welled in his eyes. Please, I sighed. I hate begging. A quick jab to the carotid artery, a short, choked gasp. Then Mallory crumpled into my arms. Out cold, I dragged his unconscious body into a waiting vehicle, stripping off his coat and ID badge. Then, pulling a voice recorder from my pocket, I pressed play. Mallory's own voice played back, spliced together from recorded conversations Victoria had provided. I am Dr. Henry Mallory. I am Dr. Henry Mallory. I am here to conduct an official review. Perfect. I slipped on his glasses, adjusted his ID badge, and looked into the car's side mirror. Dr. Henry Mallory stared back. I grinned. Showtime. I arrived at Holloway Institute just after dawn. The gates were as imposing as they were quiet, shrouded in mist, like a place out of a nightmare. The sleek black cars parked along the perimeter, guards watching, silent as statues, made it clear this wasn't your average psychiatric facility. This was a fortress. Dr. Henry Mallory's identity had served me well. My new face, my new voice, my new persona, they were all locked in place. The medical staff at the front desk barely glanced at me as I showed them Mallory's credentials, his ID badge, and a few forged papers confirming my appointment. The receptionist, a pale woman with sharp eyes, gave me a cold smile. "You're expected, Dr. Mallory. Please follow the yellow line." I nodded, walking down the sterile white corridor. The walls seemed to close in around me. The faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, sending chills down my spine. Holloway was more than a facility. It was a prison. The walls were thick, the doors reinforced. There were no windows here, just layers of concrete, steel, and tight security. I approached the elevator where two heavily armed guards stood. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me, but I could see the doubt in their eyes as I passed. Did they recognize me? Did they think something was off? I didn't wait to find out. I pressed the button for the lower levels. The elevator doors slid open with a slow, mechanical groan. As we descended deeper into the building, I couldn't help but wonder, what kind of horrors lay hidden behind these walls? The elevator dinged softly as it reached the basement. The air here was cold, damp, and the smell. There was a faint scent of antiseptic, but underneath it, something darker, something I couldn't quite place. The guard beside me glanced down, at the clipboard in his hands, nodding as we reached the locked door. "Dr. Mallory," he muttered, "you're expected in holding area C." I flashed him a smile, but I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The moment of truth. Had to play this perfectly. We walked down the hall toward the solitary confinement cells. The steel doors loomed on either side, and the quiet was suffocating. And then I saw it. A door marked, "Holding Area C." The guard stopped, tapping in a code on the keypad beside the door. It clicked open, revealing a stark white room, a bed, a single chair. And sitting in that chair, strapped down with leather restraints, was the man I had come here to see, David Langford. His hair was long, unkempt, and his face was gaunt, pale from years of isolation. He didn't look up when we entered. His eyes were vacant, lost. He had the look of a man who had been broken, completely and utterly. The guard muttered something under his breath, clearly uncomfortable, before backing out of the room, leaving me alone with David. I approached slowly, watching him, trying to read his expression. There was a faint trace of recognition when I moved closer. "David," I said, using Mallory's voice, calm, authoritative, "it's time for your review." His head jerked up, his eyes locking onto mine. They were hollow, but for a brief moment there was something sharp in them, something old and dangerous. He opened his mouth, but his voice was a whisper, raspy, hoarse. "You're not him," I froze. "Not him." I leaned in, narrowing my eyes. "I'm here to help, David. I know everything. You're going to get out of here." David's lips twisted into a grimace. "You think you know everything?" He laughed, a bitter, almost insane sound. "The only thing you know is that you're a fool." I reached for my pocket where I'd hidden the recorder. It clicked on, capturing every word. "Eric won't let me go," David continued, his voice rising in pitch. "He'll kill you before you get the chance. He's already watching. He knows you're here." My pulse quickened. The warning in his voice was unmistakable. Who's watching? I pressed, trying to control the fear rising in my chest. David's gaze turned cold. "The people who truly own Holloway?" I felt a chill run down my spine. The people who truly own Holloway? Before I could ask more, the door behind me slammed open. I spun around, my heart pounding, as a team of guards burst into the room, guns drawn. "Dr. Mallory," the lead guard said, his voice hard. "You're not supposed to be here. I barely had time to react." The gunshots rang out before I could make a move. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed in the cold, sterile room, and for a heartbeat, I thought I'd felt the searing pain of a bullet tearing through my chest. But I hadn't. I froze, heart racing as I realized the guards weren't shooting at me. I glanced around. They had David. His body was jerking in the restraints, one of the guards holding him down. The lead guard turned to me, his face expressionless. "You need to come with us." There was no time to react. I was grabbed, my arms wrenched behind my back, and within seconds I was pulled out of the room and into the long, fluorescent-lit corridor. The cold air brushed against my face as I was marched further into the depths of Holloway. I had no idea where they were taking me, no clue who was behind this. All I knew was that they weren't just any guards. They were trained professionals, moving with the precision of people who had done this 100 times before. They didn't speak, but their eyes flicked to one another with a shared understanding. This was planned. As we turned down a series of winding corridors, I tried to piece together what was happening, who had set me up. Then I remembered David's words. "He knows you're here." Eric. It had to be Eric. He must have been tracking me all along. He must have known the moment I had assumed Mallory's identity and walked through the gates of Holloway. It was a trap. A well-laid one. I was pushed into a small, windowless room, a bare, concrete chamber with a single metal chair in the middle. No windows, no cameras, only a steel door that clicked shut behind me. I didn't have much time. I had to think. Glanced around, feeling the heat of panic creeping in. I had underestimated Eric, but I wasn't out of options yet. I reached into my pocket, feeling for the recorder I had hidden earlier. I wasn't sure if it would work, but I had to try. Before I could even press play, the door opened. 2 figures entered. One was the lead guard and the other was Victoria Langford. My pulse quickened. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice steady. Victoria didn't answer immediately. She stepped closer, her gaze studying me like I was a bug under a microscope. Then she looked away, her face softening ever so slightly. "James," she murmured, "you really have no idea, do you?" I tensed, every instinct screaming that I was about to hear something that would shatter everything. Eric knew you'd come," she continued, her voice low, tinged with something almost regretful. "He knew you'd find David, and that's why we had to stop you." I shot to my feet. "Stop me?" I barked. "You're working with him? After everything?" Her lips tightened, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she turned to the lead guard. "Leave us." The guard hesitated but nodded. He stepped out of the room, leaving me alone with Victoria. The moment the door clicked shut, I took a step toward her. "What the hell is this, Victoria? You made me think you were on my side." Victoria didn't flinch. She stood there, looking, tired, drained, almost like the weight of something far darker had settled on her shoulders. She said quietly. "I was trying to help you." She swallowed, her voice breaking ever so slightly. "But when you started getting too close to David, I had no choice. You don't understand what Eric is capable of." I shook my head, my fists clenching. "So you're telling me you're protecting him?" Victoria took a deep breath, stepping closer. "I'm protecting you. This was never about Eric winning. It was about keeping you alive." I stared at her, confused. "Alive? What the hell are you talking about?" She finally met my gaze, her eyes intense, almost haunted. "Eric didn't want David to die. He just needed him contained. But the truth is, James, David didn't just kill their father." Her voice lowered, and she stepped closer, her breath shallow. "David was the real threat." I blinked. "What?" Victoria's hands trembled as she wiped away a tear. "David, he didn't just kill their father, he became their father. He took control of the Langford Empire. And Eric has spent the last decade hunting him, covering it up, keeping it quiet. Holloway was meant to be a place where no one could reach him, but now—" She took a shaky breath, her gaze flickering away. "Now, it's breaking free. I shook my head in disbelief. You're telling me that David Langford, the crazy brother, was the one in charge this whole time? Victoria nodded. Yes. And Eric. Eric has been running from that truth, hiding it, lying to everyone, including you. I took a step back, the weight of her words hitting me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about revenge. This wasn't just about a long-held family secret. This was about power, who held it, who controlled it, and who was willing to destroy everything to keep it. Before I could say anything else, the door burst open again. A figure stood in the doorway, Eric Langford himself. He looked almost disappointed. I didn't know how much time had passed. Minutes? Hours? Time felt like it had stopped the moment the guards hauled me down those cold, echoing hallways. Every step felt heavier. Every breath came slower. I could hear the pounding of my heart. In my ears, the rush of adrenaline still coursing through me. But one thing was certain. I wasn't done yet. The guards shoved me into another room, this one darker than the rest, with no windows, no escape. I stumbled and caught myself on a chair, my hands still bound tightly behind me. My mind raced. This is it. This is how it ends, isn't it? But then I remembered Victoria's words. You don't understand what Eric is capable of. Eric Langford had been playing me this whole time. He had been one step ahead, pulling strings from the shadows while I'd been focused on finding David. But now I knew the truth. David was just a pawn in Eric's game, and that meant there was still a chance to turn things around. The door slammed open with a loud bang, pulling me out of my thoughts. Eric stepped inside, his sharp gaze locking onto mine. His expression was cold, but there was something else there, something darker. A mixture of anger and fear. You really thought you could take me down, didn't you, James? His voice was smooth, but laced with contempt. I met his gaze without flinching. I thought I could expose the truth. Eric's lips twisted into a cruel smile. The truth? You have no idea what the truth really is. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. David didn't just kill our father, James. He replaced him. And now, he's coming for me. I frowned. What the hell are you talking about? Eric's smile faltered, his eyes flickering with a moment of vulnerability before he masked it again with arrogance. David wasn't just mentally unstable. He was something else. Something I couldn't control. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. He wanted to take everything. My company, my power, my life, and I couldn't let that happen. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. The man standing before me was no longer the cool, calculated Eric Langford I'd been chasing. This was a man who had lost control. Why keep him alive, then? I asked, my voice steady despite the tension building in the air. Why put him in Holloway if you were so afraid of him? Eric laughed bitterly, turning his back to me. Because I needed to hide him. No one could ever know what he really was. No one could understand the power he had. He had my power, James. He was the true heir, not me. He turned back toward me, his eyes burning with a wild intensity. But I made sure no one would ever know that. I made sure I stayed in control. A chill ran through me. So you lied to everyone. You built this empire on a lie, a facade that David was just a mentally unstable sibling. Eric's jaw clenched. Exactly. But that's over now, isn't it? I pressed, testing the waters. David's out and he's coming for you. Eric's eyes hardened, and I saw the desperation flash across his face. You don't understand. He's unstoppable. You think he's just some broken man locked away in a cell? No, James. David. He's the reason Holloway exists. He's the reason for everything. And now he's coming for me. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. The pieces clicked into place. David wasn't just a victim in this twisted family drama. He was the true architect of everything, the real mastermind behind Langford Enterprises. He'd been hidden away for decades, and Eric's whole life had been a desperate attempt to keep that secret buried. "And what are you going to do, Eric?" I asked, my voice dark. "Are you going to keep hiding from your own brother forever?" Eric's eyes flickered to the door behind me, and I realized with a start that I wasn't alone. The guards who had taken me here stepped forward, their hands reaching for the restraints on my wrists. But they weren't there to restrain me. They were here to help Eric. Eric's smile returned, but it was twisted, empty. "You were never meant to be a part of this, James. You were just a tool, a pawn. You and Victoria both." I strained against. My restraints, adrenaline surging in my veins. I wasn't just going to let him get away with this. Not after everything he'd done, not after the lies, the manipulation, and the power he'd abused for so long. "You're wrong," I said through gritted teeth. "You're not in control anymore. You've already lost." Before Eric could respond, the door to the room swung open with a crash. A figure stepped into the doorway, a shadow in the dim light. David. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw him. Really saw him. He looked different. His hair, once disheveled, was neat. His eyes, once wild, were calm. But there was something haunting in his gaze, a quiet, predatory intensity that made my blood run cold. "Eric." David's voice was soft, almost gentle, but there was an edge to it. "I think it's time we ended this, don't you?" The door slammed shut behind me, and the cold darkness of the holding cell closed in like a vice. The guards didn't say a word as they shoved me into the small, damp room, my hands still bound tightly behind my back. They left me alone, the echo of their footsteps fading into the distant corridor. I stood there for a long moment, just listening to the silence, the kind of silence that suffocates. It was as though the walls themselves were closing in on me, pressing in from all sides. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything I had just learned. David was the true mastermind. Eric, the man I'd spent months trying to expose, was nothing more than a puppet. But now, in the cold, unforgiving darkness of this cell, I realized something more. David wasn't just playing a game. He was building something far more dangerous than I had imagined. And I was caught in the middle. I couldn't allow this to be the end. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I couldn't let David or Eric control the narrative any longer. I tugged at the ropes binding my wrists. They were tight, but not impossible to undo. I had been through worse. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to freedom, to finding a way to break out of this hellhole. I just needed a plan. A small noise interrupted my thoughts, a scrape of metal on stone. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Someone was coming. The door creaked open, and I tensed, ready to fight. But it wasn't a guard. It was Victoria. Her face was pale, her expression strained, but there was a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in her before. Guilt? Regret? I couldn't be sure. "James," she whispered, stepping into the room. She quickly closed the door behind her, making sure no one saw her. "You're not supposed to be here. You need to leave. Now." I blinked, confused. "What the hell is going on, Victoria? You're the one who brought me into this mess. What is it you're not telling me?" Victoria glanced over her shoulder, making sure the hallway was clear before she took a step closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. "I didn't have a choice. Eric and David, they've been running this place for years, but what they've built is a house of cards. I never wanted you involved, but once you started digging, once you found the truth, I couldn't stop it. Now you're in too deep." I shook my head, trying to make sense of her words. "So, you knew what was going on all this time?" I demanded. "You lied to me. You used me." Victoria's eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you, James. You don't understand. What they've built, it's dangerous. It's bigger than both of them, bigger than anything we can imagine. I thought I could control it, but I was wrong. Control it? I spat. They're playing with people's lives. Victoria, what happened to you? You were the one who helped me, the one who wanted to expose the truth. Her shoulders slumped and she turned away from me, her voice softening. I thought I could help you. I really did. But I was wrong. Now I'm just trying to survive. Her words hung heavy in the air. Survive. That word echoed in my mind louder than the pounding of my heart. She wasn't trying to save me. She was trying to save herself. Victoria took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small black device and tossed it onto the floor in front of me. I don't have much time, she said urgently. That's a tracker. It'll give you access to the security systems. If you're going to escape, you need to act fast. I stared at the device, my mind racing. It was a risk, a huge one, but it was my only shot. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice sharp. Victoria's gaze met mine, and for the first time I saw something close to fear in her eyes. Because I can't let David win. If he does, he'll destroy everything, including you. And I won't let that happen. I nodded, clenching my fists. I'm not going to let him destroy everything either. But I can't do it alone. She hesitated for a moment, then took a step back toward the door. I'll be watching. I won't let them know you're gone. Before I could respond, she slipped out of the room, disappearing into the shadows. I looked down at the small device on the floor. It was now or never. I could either sit in this cell, waiting for them to come back and finish what they'd started, or I could take a risk and break out. I knelt down, grabbed the tracker, and fiddled with the buttons. It was a simple interface, too simple for something that could unlock the entire security system of this facility. But I had no time to second guess. My fingers worked quickly, my breath shallow as I hacked into the system, one finger pressing against the screen at a time. The device hummed for a second. Then the security systems in the building flickered, and the faintest sound of mechanical locks being disengaged reached my ears. I was in. The corridor was silent, but I could feel the weight of every step as I moved deeper into Holloway. The tracker in my hand pulsed faintly, guiding me like a beacon, but I knew time was running out. I had to act fast. If I didn't get out soon, David would find me. He'd stop me before I could expose everything. I moved carefully, staying low and out of sight, my senses heightened as I passed the empty rooms and hallways. The security systems were still down, but I didn't know for how long. Victoria had given me an opportunity, but there were no guarantees. The place felt like a maze, and I quickly realized it was more than just the guards I had to worry about. The walls themselves seemed to press in on me, each turn a new challenge, each step a dangerous gamble. But I wasn't going back. There was no way I was going to let David or Eric win. As I turned a corner, I saw a flicker of movement, a guard, walking briskly toward me. My heart skipped a beat. Stay calm, stay in the shadows. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. The guard passed without looking in my direction. I exhaled quietly, the tension in my body slowly easing. But I knew it wouldn't last long. I had to keep moving. The further I went, the more the reality of what I was doing hit me. I wasn't just trying to escape. I was trying to bring down an empire, one built on lies, secrets, and blood. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The Langford family had built their empire on manipulation, and it was time for the truth to finally come to light. I pushed forward, my mind focused on the mission at hand. If I could get to the control room, I could unlock the system and shut down everything. The alarms, the cameras, the security doors, everything. But first, I needed to find it. The map of the building was still fresh in my mind from when I'd been in the security room. I'd memorized the paths, the locations of key rooms, everything I could use. I was getting close. But then, just as I reached a narrow hallway, I heard voices. The sharp, clipped tones of Eric's men. They were talking about me. Has he been moved yet? One voice asked. Not yet. We're still searching. He's got to be somewhere in the lower levels, another replied. I froze. They were looking for me, and they were getting closer. I couldn't let them find me. I glanced around, panicking for a moment before spotting a door to a storage room. I darted inside, closing it quietly behind me. The room was cramped, boxes stacked high against the walls, shelves full of equipment. I crouched low, holding my breath, trying to silence the frantic beat of my heart. The footsteps grew louder, then paused just outside the door. I pressed myself into the shadows, praying they wouldn't open it. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, the footsteps faded. They moved on. I waited for what felt like an hour before I dared to let out a sigh of relief. But I knew I couldn't waste any more time. I had to get to that control room. I slipped out of the storage room and continued on, heart racing, my eyes darting around for any sign of movement. The air felt thick with danger, and every corner I turned felt like a gamble. As I reached the hallway leading to the control room, I saw the guards. Two of them standing by the door, talking in low voices. I knew I had only one option. I pulled the tracker out of my pocket, pressed a few buttons, and within seconds, the lights in the hallway flickered. The security systems were back online, but I had gained control. I whispered a silent thanks to Victoria and moved swiftly toward the guards. With a quick, calculated motion, I launched myself toward the first one. I knocked him off balance, sending him crashing to the ground. The second guard reached for his gun, but I was faster. I grabbed his arm and twisted, disarming him before slamming him into the wall. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. I stood over them, breathing heavily. They were out for the moment, but I couldn't linger. The door to the control room was only a few steps away. I pushed it open and slipped inside, my pulse pounding in my ears. The room was dark, filled with blinking monitors and control panels. In the center, a large console controlled the entire facility. Everything from the doors to the cameras to the security systems. I quickly got to work, fingers flying over the keys, hacking into the system. The security cameras blinked to life, showing every hallway, every room. I could see the guards moving through the facility, searching for me. But now, I was in control. I smiled grimly, typing faster. The first thing I did was lock all the security doors, trapping everyone inside. It would buy me some time, at least. The next thing I did was far more dangerous. I began pulling up the files, the hidden files on Eric and David Langford, the ones that could destroy them both. The tension in the control room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eric stood there, his posture rigid, eyes locked onto mine like a predator sizing up its prey. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. You really think you can expose me, James? Eric's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it, something barely contained beneath the surface. He wasn't as calm as he appeared. I stood my ground, my fingers hovering over the console. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with the enormity of what I was about to do. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when I was this close to, ending everything Eric and David had built. You're not in control anymore, Eric, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I have the power now. I have everything. Eric's lips twisted into a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. Do you really think you understand what you're up against? What David and I have created? This isn't just a business, James. This is a legacy. A legacy that's going to outlive both of us. Your legacy is built on lies, Eric, I shot back, my fingers brushing over the keys. And it's about to come crashing down. For a moment, we both stood there in silence, the hum of the computer system the only sound in the room. I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me, The files, the footage, everything I had uncovered about the Langford brothers. The lies, the manipulation, the twisted web they had woven to keep their empire standing. Eric took a step closer, his gaze narrowing, calculating. You really think you can expose all of this and just walk away, don't you? You think you're some hero in a story where you can destroy everything and walk out clean? I didn't flinch. I'm not a hero, Eric. I'm just the one who's going to make sure the truth gets out. You've been lying to the world for too long. Eric's eyes flickered with something. Rage, maybe? Or was it fear? Whatever it was, it fueled his next words. You're a fool, James. You don't know what David's capable of. Before I could respond, a voice echoed through the room, cold and chilling. You're both fools. I turned, heart skipping a beat. There, standing in the doorway, was David. But this wasn't the same David I had seen earlier. There was no trace of the vulnerability he'd shown when he was locked away. His eyes were cold, calculating, and the faintest smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He was in control now, fully in control. Eric's face twisted with a mix of disgust and apprehension. What the hell are you doing here, David? David didn't answer. He simply stepped into the room, his eyes never leaving mine. There was a calmness about him, an eerie, unsettling calmness that sent a shiver down my spine. You've made a grave mistake, James, David said, his voice smooth like silk. You've exposed all the wrong things. I felt my throat tighten. I haven't exposed everything yet, but I will. David's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. You think you figured out the game, but you're just a pawn. Both of you are. You always were. He turned to Eric, his voice dripping with disdain. You were always the weak one, Eric. Always hiding behind your lies. Always afraid of the truth. I had to clean up your mess. I had to make sure you were safe. That this empire was safe. Eric's face darkened, his fists clenching. You're a monster, David. You think you can take everything and leave nothing behind? You think you can control everything forever? David's eyes gleamed with a cold, cruel light. I'm not taking everything, Eric. I'm simply taking what's mine, and what's always been mine. I could feel the room closing in, the air thick with tension. David was right. He wasn't just some broken man locked away. He was a force to be reckoned with, the true mastermind behind the Langford Empire, the one who had orchestrated everything from the shadows, and now he was ready to take it all back. Eric stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. You'll never get away with this, David. You're nothing without me. You're nothing without us. David's laughter was chilling. That's where you're wrong, Eric. I'm everything without you, and I always have been. I knew I had to. Act fast. The control room was no longer safe. David and Eric were about to tear each other apart, and I had to get out of there before I got caught in the crossfire. But I had one last move to make. With a quick motion, I pressed a button on the console, activating the security feed. I began broadcasting the files to every screen in the building. The files that contained the truth about the Langford brothers. The footage, the documents, the recordings of their manipulation and crimes. Everything they had tried to keep hidden. David's eyes flickered to the monitors, his smile faltering as the truth spilled out in front of him. No, he growled, his voice dangerously low. You can't do this. The world outside the gates of Holloway felt surreal. The night air, cool and sharp against my skin, was a stark contrast to the suffocating heat inside the facility. But even as I stood there, breathing in the fresh air, the echoes of everything that had happened, the secrets exposed, the empire crumbling, still reverberated in my mind. I didn't have much time. David, Eric, and their men wouldn't stop. They couldn't afford to. The truth had been broadcast to every screen in the building, and the Langford empire was already unraveling. The authorities would be closing in soon, but I couldn't afford to wait for them. There was still one thing left to do. The streets outside the facility were empty, the distant sounds of sirens piercing the night air as I jogged down the alley, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get to the safe house before they realized. I had escaped. They would be hunting for me, and if they caught me, everything I'd done would be for nothing. I pulled out my phone, dialing a number I knew by heart. It rang only once before a voice picked up. "James, where the hell are you? What happened?" It was Victoria. Her voice was tight with panic, but there was a hint of urgency in it too. "I'm out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I need you to listen. The footage, everything I've sent, it's out there. It's on every screen in the building. They're going to come for me." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Victoria spoke, her tone colder. "Now." "I know. But you're not safe yet. You've just exposed the tip of the iceberg. You think David's going to let you walk away after this?" "I don't have a choice," I said, my breath quickening. "You've got to make sure the authorities get to the building before they clean up the mess. Before they erase everything." "I already called them," she said, voice sharp. "But you're not thinking this through. There's more at play here than you realize. You don't know what David's capable of." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I couldn't stop now. "Then help me stop him. Help me finish this." Victoria was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was darker, almost resigned. "There's only so much I can do, James. I'm not your ally anymore, not the way you think I am. I've been playing this game too long, and now you're in the thick of it. You'll have to finish it yourself." Her words hit me like a punch. For the first time, I realized that Victoria might not be the ally I thought she was. Maybe she had never been. I had to face it. The game was bigger than I had imagined. And I was in deeper than I had ever realized. "I thought you were on my side," I whispered, disbelief heavy in my voice. "I am," she replied, but there was no warmth. "I am. But there are lines you don't cross, James. You just crossed one." I shook my head, trying to push the sinking feeling in my gut aside. "Where do I go? What do I do now?" "Head east," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a safe house in the woods, a place to lay low until it all blows over. But you need to move quickly. They'll be after you." I didn't hesitate. I cut the call and ran faster, pushing myself harder. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, keeping me sharp, keeping me focused. I didn't know how long I could stay ahead of them. I didn't know who was going to turn on, me next. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stop until this was finished. The safe house was tucked away in a remote part of the woods, miles from the chaos at Holloway. The last part of the journey was a blur, my feet pounding against the dirt road, my mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. What if David had already tracked me? What if they were already waiting for me at the house? I reached the house just before dawn, the faintest light beginning to creep over the horizon. It was an old, weathered cabin, barely visible through the dense trees. I approached cautiously, my senses on high alert. The door creaked open as I stepped inside, and I immediately locked it behind me, double-checking the bolt. The house was dim and quiet, nothing like the cold, sterile walls of Holloway. It felt safe, for now. I moved to the back of the cabin, where a small desk sat beneath a single window. There, on top of the desk, was a folder filled with documents. The last of the evidence I needed. I spread the papers out, reviewing everything one last time. The Langford brothers were ruthless, yes, but they were also meticulous, and now everything was in my hands. I looked at the evidence, wondering how much of it could truly bring them down, how much of it was enough. I didn't know yet, but I knew it would be a fight, the kind of fight that wouldn't end until everything came to light. And just as I began to gather the papers, a soft knock echoed from the door. I froze. My hand instinctively went to the gun I'd taken from the guards at Holloway, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal. The morning light behind Victoria was almost angelic, casting a soft glow around her, but the tension in the air was palpable. My hand stayed on the grip of the gun, my breath shallow and quick. "Victoria," I said, the word hanging in the air, with more weight than I intended. "What are you doing here?" She didn't flinch, didn't raise her hands in surrender. Her eyes met mine with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm here to make sure you don't do something stupid." "James." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly, lowering the gun but not entirely relaxing. "I'm the one doing something stupid? After everything you said, you're still here playing your games?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a flicker of something else. Regret, maybe? But then it was gone, like smoke vanishing into the night. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. You're out here thinking you're the one who's going to take down the Langford brothers, but you don't see the bigger picture. David's been playing this game for far longer than you think." I didn't know whether to trust her words, but there was no denying the weight they carried. "Then help me. Help me finish it. Help me expose them for what they are." She hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The silence between us was thick, like the calm before a storm. "You think exposing them will stop them, James?" she asked, her voice low, almost sorrowful. "You've triggered something much bigger than you realize. They're not just businessmen. This isn't just about power or money. It's about survival. For them. For all of us." I took a step back, trying to process what she was saying. "What the hell does that mean?" Victoria's gaze softened for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by that familiar coldness. "David and Eric aren't just brothers, James. They're heirs to something much darker than you can comprehend. Their father didn't just build an empire. He made deals with forces that go beyond the law, beyond anything you've ever seen. This isn't a fight you can win with evidence or truth. You need more than that." I was starting to lose patience. "You've been playing both sides all along. You've known all of this, haven't you? You've known what they were capable of, and you've been feeding me breadcrumbs. Why now? Why are you here?" Victoria sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Because, James, you're too close now. They've realized you know too much. They've always had a plan, a backup, and they won't stop until you're dead. Not because they're angry, but because you're a threat to everything they've built. Your one mistake is thinking that this is about right and wrong. It's about power and survival." Her words hung heavy in the room. I could feel the walls closing in on me, the truth of what she was saying sinking in. The Langford brothers were dangerous. I had known that. But the scale of it, the depth of their power, was something I hadn't even begun to grasp. But if they were capable of anything, they would stop at nothing to keep their empire standing. Victoria took a step closer, her expression unreadable. "The Langford legacy isn't just their father's doing. It's an inheritance of sorts. A bloodline tied to something older, more powerful. The kind of power you don't just walk away from. And now you're in the middle of it." I could feel my pulse quickening. "What are you talking about? This doesn't make sense. You're telling me there's some kind of... What? Cult leaders? You're saying they've been doing this for decades? Generations?" Victoria looked away, as if weighing whether or not she should tell me the full truth. "You don't understand, but you will. That's why I'm here. I can help you. But you need to listen to me. You need to stop trying to expose them like you've been doing. That won't end well for you. If you want to bring them down, if you want to survive, you'll have to work with me. You can't beat them alone." The room felt colder now, and I was left with a decision I hadn't anticipated. Was Victoria truly on my side? Or was she another piece in this dangerous game I had stepped into? Her words about survival, about bloodlines, echoed in my mind, but I didn't have the luxury of trusting her completely. Not yet. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my focus. So what do you suggest we do? Victoria met my gaze, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw something I hadn't expected: vulnerability. We need to stop them before they do the unthinkable. But that means making hard choices. It means making sacrifices. I clenched my fists, the weight of her words hitting me all at once. I'm not making sacrifices. I'm stopping them. I'm going to make sure they pay for everything they've done. Her eyes softened again, but only for a moment. Then you're already lost. Before I could respond, a loud, rapid knock came at the door, sharp and insistent. My heart leapt in my chest.